What if I told you that the greatest wisdom in life doesn't come from books or schools or billion-dollar boardrooms, but from the quiet living room of someone who has made it past 80? You see, there's a kind of elderly wisdom that only time can teach. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. But it holds the answers to questions we spend our whole lives chasing. What matters most? How do we truly age with grace? And what do we do when the world around us begins to disappear, one goodbye at a time? If you're over 70, or you love someone who is, this video is for you. Because life after 70 is not just about slowing down. It's about showing up. It's about aging with purpose, finding peace in solitude, and facing some of the hardest truths with unshakable strength. But let's not sugarcoat it. Getting older also means confronting brutal realities: loneliness, declining health, loss of independence, and the quiet grief of being the one who's still here while so many others are gone. And yet, in that quiet, there is power. Today, we'll explore 5 hard truths every senior must face, and the hidden beauty inside each one. Along the way, we'll uncover lessons in senior health, healthy aging, and the kind of life lessons that don't just help us survive these years, but live them fully. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you look at aging forever. Fact number 1, declining health. When Harold turned 81, he thought he had already faced the toughest chapters of his life. He had lost friends of war, said goodbye to his wife of 50 years, and raised children who now lived oceans away. But nothing prepared him for quiet, creeping shift that came next, not in his heart, but in his body. Once a man who woke early to tend his garden, Harold now struggled just to get out of bed. His knees ached. His back stiffened. Climbing the stairs felt like hiking a mountain. Simple tasks, tying shoes, reaching for a plate, standing too long, required the kind of focus he once reserved for fixing a leaky pipe or changing a tire. His muscles had grown thin, his energy scattered, and no doctor could prescribe youth. And yet, in the stillness of his days, Harold began to notice something else growing. Something deeper than pain. Elderly wisdom. It didn't arrive like lightning. It whispered in the spaces between discomfort. It came in the form of patience, of choosing peace over speed, of finding meaning in slowing down. He realized that declining health didn't mean he was fading. It meant he was entering a different season of life. A season not marked by how far he could walk, but by how deeply he could feel, how clearly he could reflect. It's a truth many resist. Life after 70 is filled with changes, and not all of them are kind. Our bodies, once so reliable, begin to write their own rules. Illness becomes a frequent guest. Doctor visits, medications, unfamiliar diagnoses, they all settle in like permanent roommates. And for many, it's easy to fall into despair, to believe that growing old means growing weak. But here's the real-life lesson Harold discovered. Strength doesn't always look like what it used to. Strength, for him now, was showing up. It was choosing to smile at the nurse who drew his blood. It was remembering to breathe deeply before getting out of bed. It was accepting help, even when pride said no. There's a grace, a dignity, in facing decline with open eyes. And it is here, right in the hard discomfort, that healthy aging begins. You see, senior health isn't just about preventing disease. It's about how we meet the realities of aging. It's about adapting without bitterness. It's about listening to the body, honoring its limits, and asking not, how do I fight this, but how do I live well with this? For Harold, that meant redefining purpose. He could no longer volunteer at the shelter or walk to church every Sunday, but he could still write letters. He could still sit on his porch and wave to neighbors. He could still call his grandchildren and tell them bedtime stories, even if his voice trembled. He could still pass on the quiet, powerful wisdom of the elderly, the kind that says, even now I matter. So many of us grow up fearing old age. We see only what is lost: speed, strength, clarity. But Harold reminds us that aging with purpose is not about preserving the past. It's about embracing the present. Even in decline, life has meaning, perhaps especially in decline. There's a beauty in fragility, a lesson in limitation. And if you listen closely, you might hear the same truth Harold found in the silence of his home. That even when the body weakens, the soul can rise stronger. So if you're entering your 80s, or simply caring for someone who is, know this. It's okay to grieve what was, but don't forget to celebrate what still is. Because the final chapters of life are not about endings. They're about revealing what's been there all along. Resilience, reflection, and the soft but steady voice of elderly wisdom. And sometimes that's the loudest truth of all. Fact number 2, persistent loneliness. The persistent loneliness, the silence no one speaks about. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from turning off the television or closing the window on a quiet evening. It comes from the absence of voices that once filled your home. The silence of no footsteps in the hallway. No phone ringing just to say, "I was thinking of you." For Margaret, that silence became her new normal. She was 85, a retired school librarian, and her days were once full of stories, both on the page and in the classroom. But now, the chapters of her days felt eerily blank. Her husband had passed 5 years earlier. Her daughter moved to another state. Her closest friends were no longer alive, or simply too frail to meet for lunch. And so, mornings stretched endlessly. Meals became quiet rituals. Evenings turned into shadows. This is what life after 70 often hides behind the polite smiles in public. Persistent loneliness. It's not just about being alone. It's about feeling alone, even when surrounded by people. It's the ache of invisibility, the strange sensation of living in a world that has moved on without you. And yet, here too, elderly wisdom shows its face, not through solutions, but through resilience. Margaret didn't suddenly find a new circle of best friends. She didn't move into a retirement community with endless social events. What she found was something quieter, purpose and small connections. She began to volunteer once a week at the local library, not to sell books, but just to read stories to children. She wrote postcards to her niece. She adopted a rescue cat named Louie. Did these things cure the ache? No, but they softened it. They reminded her that loneliness is a feeling, not a sentence. That even in isolation, we have the power to create bridges. Senior health professionals have long studied the emotional toll of loneliness. It increases the risk of heart disease, depression, even dementia. But statistics aside, the real weight of loneliness is in how it reshapes identity. When we lose our social ties, we often lose parts of ourselves. But what healthy aging requires is the courage to reintroduce yourself to your own company and to rediscover what still brings you joy. That's a hard life lesson, especially when you spend your life surrounded by family, co-workers, church members, neighbors. But Margaret teaches us something precious. The antidote to loneliness is not always more people, it's deeper meaning. Maybe that means writing your memoir, even if no one else reads it. Maybe it means tending to a small garden. Maybe it's as simple as making tea, sitting by the window, and whispering a prayer of gratitude for another day. Because aging with purpose isn't about escaping loneliness. It's about transforming it. It's about listening to what it's trying to tell you. And often, it's saying this: you're still here. You still matter. And someone, somewhere, still needs your story. The truth is, everyone at some point in life will face loneliness. But for the elderly, it's not always a phase. It can be a long, quiet stretch of years. And that's why we must talk about it. Out loud. We must bring this invisible pain into the light. Not just for Margaret, but for the millions who sit at their kitchen tables tonight, staring at the same four walls, wondering if anyone remembers them. Let them know you are not forgotten. Your presence still echoes in ways you may not see, in the lives you've touched, in the lessons you've taught, in the strength you've passed down, quietly but powerfully. This is elderly wisdom in its purest form, not just enduring loneliness, but choosing to live beyond it. So if today feels heavy, if the silence around you feels like too much to bear, please know you are not alone in your loneliness. And if you're younger and watching this, remember, the greatest gift you can give someone over 70 may not be money or medicine. It might just be a phone call, a visit, a shared cup of tea. Because to someone who's lost too many goodbyes, your hello could mean everything. Fact number 3, memory challenges. Memory challenges. When names fade but wisdom remains. It started with small things. For James, it was forgetting where he left his glasses. then his keys, then the appointment he swore was on Tuesday, not Thursday. At first, he laughed it off. He called it senior moments, made jokes at his own expense. But one afternoon, standing in the grocery store aisle, he looked at a familiar face and could not recall the name of the woman who had lived next door to him for 25 years. That was the moment the laughter stopped. This is one of the quiet fears that creeps into life after 70. The fear of forgetting, not just things, but people, places, memories that once defined you. James had always been sharp, a retired accountant. He prided himself on his mental clarity. Numbers, dates, names, those were his tools. But aging brings a new kind of arithmetic, one where memories slowly subtract themselves without warning or permission. And yet this story isn't about fear. It's about what happens next. Because for James, like so many others, the challenge of memory loss didn't erase his value. It revealed a new kind of strength, a deeper form of elderly wisdom, the kind that whispers, "You are not your forgetfulness. You are the love you've lived, the lives you've touched, and the grace with which you carry this change." Memory challenges are more than just medical. They're emotional. They strip away confidence, make you second-guess your words, retreat from conversations out of embarrassment. But James learned that forgetting didn't make him less of himself. It simply asked him to be more present, to slow down, to hold on to what does remain. And what remained was beautiful. He still remembered the smell of his wife's perfume, the song she used to hum while washing dishes, the way their son looked the day he left for college. Some memories never ask to be remembered. They just stay. This, too, is part of healthy aging. Not fighting change, but learning how to live beside it. James began writing down the stories he could still recall. He kept a notebook by the couch, not out of panic, but as an act of preservation, a quiet rebellion against the fog. His grandchildren began to read those stories. They didn't care if the dates were exact. What they treasured were the feelings, the moments, the lessons. Because here's the truth that no doctor's chart can capture. Elderly wisdom doesn't live in perfect recall. It lives in reflection, in presence, in heart. It lives in a man who forgets your name, but never forgets how to make you laugh. In the woman who repeats herself, but always remembers to say, "I love you." In the grandfather who asks the same question 3 times, but never forgets to ask if you're okay. Memory loss may dim the details, but it cannot dim the soul. And for those walking alongside a loved one facing this challenge, be patient, be gentle. Understand that when they forget your birthday, it doesn't mean they love you any less. Their mind is changing, not their heart. James's family learned this. They stopped correcting him. They started joining him in the moments that mattered. And in doing so, they discovered something unexpected. A new kind of closeness. A slower, more intentional kind of love. That's one of the great life lessons aging teaches us. That perfection is overrated. What matters most isn't what you remember. It's how you remember. With tenderness. With presence. With purpose. So if you're forgetting things more often now, know this. You are not broken. You are evolving. Aging with purpose means allowing yourself to be human. To laugh at the moments you forget. To cherish the ones you still hold. And to remember that your value has never been about what you recall. It's about who you are. James still forgets things. But he also remembers how to be kind. How to forgive. How to listen when someone is hurting. He may forget the names, but he never forgets to care. And that, dear friend, is a form of memory that matters more than anything else. That is elderly wisdom. Timeless, wordless, unforgettable. Fact number 4. Reduced independence. Reduced independence. When the hands that built everything need help. Eleanor had always been the one who helped. She raised 4 children, ran her household like a symphony, baked every birthday cake, folded every towel with care. She was the one people called when they needed a ride, a meal, a place to stay. Her hands had built a life for so many. But at 84, those same hands now trembled as she tried to button her blouse. It's one of the hardest transitions in life after 70, the shift from giving help to needing it. The first time she had a hand over the car keys, It felt like surrender. She had driven her whole life, to church, to the market, to the hospital to visit her husband when he was sick. That steering wheel wasn't just a tool, it was freedom. And now, she had to rely on others, on schedules, on someone else's willingness to drive her to the post office. Every small act of dependence felt like losing a part of herself. But what Eleanor didn't know then, and what she would slowly learn, is that losing independence does not mean losing dignity. It doesn't mean your story is over. It just means a page is turning. This is the unspoken truth of aging. Our bodies change before our spirits do. We still want to do everything we once did, but the stairs get steeper, the jars get tighter, the sidewalks get more uneven. We begin to ask for help, not because we're weak, but because we're wise enough to know when to rest. That's the quiet power of elderly wisdom. It teaches us to accept assistance with grace, to receive with the same love we once gave. For Eleanor, the turning point came one evening as she watched her granddaughter tie her shoes for her. Her first instinct was shame. I should be able to do this myself. But then, as she looked into the girl's eyes, she saw it wasn't pity there. It was tenderness. It was love. It was a joy of giving back. That's when she realized, accepting help doesn't make you a burden. It makes you a teacher. It gives others a chance to learn kindness, patience, service. Healthy aging isn't about doing everything alone. It's about recognizing when together is better, when asking for help is actually an act of courage. Eleanor began to find rhythm in her new life. She let her daughter handle the groceries. She used a walker on long walks. She asked a young man next door to help change a light bulb. And in doing so, she discovered something unexpected: connection. The more she accepted help, the more people showed up, not out of duty, but out of love. There's a deep life lesson in that. Sometimes our strength isn't in doing, but in receiving. We live in a world that glorifies independence. But the later chapters of life ask a different question. Can you let yourself be cared for? Can you allow others to step in without guilt or shame? And when you do, can you see it not as weakness, but as a gift? Because truthfully, aging with purpose often means redefining strength. It means showing the next generation how to age with humility, how to accept change with grace, how to soften into life instead of bracing against it. For Eleanor, it meant learning that freedom doesn't always look like driving alone down the highway. Sometimes it looks like sitting in the passenger seat, trusting the road ahead, and enjoying the view. So if today you need a hand to steady your walk, a ride to your appointment, or someone to open the jar, you are not less. You are living proof of what it means to keep going, to keep trusting, to keep loving. Even when your hands can no longer do what they once did, this is not the end. This is another form of beginning, and you still matter deeply, profoundly, beautifully, because the truth is, the hands that once built everything still have so much to teach. That, dear friend, is elderly wisdom in its most tender form. Fact number 5, frequent goodbyes. Frequent goodbyes. The quiet grief of still being here. There's a different kind of grief that comes with age. It's not loud. It doesn't scream. It comes quietly, like a familiar shadow at the edge of the room. It comes when you wake up one morning and realize that someone you used to call every Sunday isn't there to answer anymore. Helen knew this kind of grief all too well. By 86, she had buried her husband, her younger sister, 3 closest friends, and even a son who left the world too soon. She had grown used to the sound of her own breath in the silence. She had stopped setting 2 places at the table. She had learned to smile through memories that arrived uninvited. This is one of the most brutal truths of life after 70, the long, slow rhythm of frequent goodbyes. At first, you think it's just part of life. One funeral, then another, but after a while, it begins to feel like the world is fading around you. Familiar voices disappear. Birthdays go uncelebrated. Traditions vanish with the people who created them. And somehow, you're still here. It's a strange kind of survivor's guilt. Not because you did something wrong, but because you're left holding the weight of everyone you loved. This grief isn't always spoken about. It hides behind polite smiles and phrases like, "I'm doing fine." But deep inside, there's a heaviness, a loneliness no company can cure. Because the truth is, senior health isn't just about your body. It's about your heart. And a heart that keeps losing, over and over, becomes tender in places no doctor can reach. But here's where elderly wisdom shines in its most sacred form. It doesn't tell you to stop crying. It doesn't ask you to move on. It simply says, you love deeply, and this ache is the cost of that love. Helen used to feel guilty for her sadness. She didn't want to seem ungrateful for the life she still had. But over time, she began to understand something. Grief isn't a weakness. It's proof that something beautiful once lived. She began to light candles every evening, not out of superstition, but remembrance. One for her husband, one for her son, one for each friend whose laughter still echoed in her memory. It became a quiet ritual, a sacred honoring of those who had shaped her. She also began to write letters to them, not to send, just to say the things left unsaid. I miss your stories. I wish you could see your grandchildren now. Thank you for being my soft place of land. Through those letters, she found peace, not because the pain disappeared, but because she gave it somewhere to rest. This is one of the most powerful life lessons aging teaches us, that the deepest love often lives alongside the deepest loss. And rather than run from it, we are invited to tend to it, to sit with our sorrow, to let it teach us. Healthy aging doesn't mean you no longer cry. It means you've learned that tears are not the end. They're part of the healing. And aging with purpose? Sometimes that purpose is simply to remember, to keep stories alive, to be the last voice that still carries the names of those who once lived. Helen began to volunteer at a local oral history project, sharing stories of the people she had loved, their names, their laughter, their quirks. They would not be forgotten, because in telling those stories, she gave them life again, not just for herself, but for the next generation. And in doing so, she found something remarkable. Even in loss, you can still give. Even in pain, you can still heal others. Even in goodbye, there is still the whisper of love, that is elderly wisdom, the kind born not from avoiding loss, but from living through it with an open heart. So if today your heart feels heavy, if you've lost more people than you care to count, please remember, you are still here for a reason. And perhaps that reason is this: to be the memory keeper, the storyteller, the gentle light that reminds the world what once was and still matters. Because even in the face of so many goodbyes, you're still holding on to something beautiful, the proof that love lived, and that it lives still through you. As we navigate the later chapters of life, it becomes clear that growing older isn't just about numbers or aches. It's about facing emotional, physical, and spiritual shifts with grace. The truth is, life after 70 brings with it 5 silent but powerful challenges: declining health, persistent loneliness, memory struggles, loss of independence, and the pain of frequent goodbyes. These are not signs of failure. They are universal markers of a life long lived. And in each of these challenges lies something even more precious: elderly wisdom. So how can we use this wisdom to live better today? First, prioritize your health, but with kindness. Senior health isn't about perfection. It's about listening to your body, adjusting expectations, and embracing healthy aging as a journey, not a destination. Walk slower, rest more, nourish your body with care, not judgment. Second, combat loneliness with intention. Don't wait for others to reach out. Be the one who sends the first message, joins a community group, or smiles at a stranger. True connection starts with small acts of courage. Third, accept help with open arms. Letting others in isn't weakness. It's how we teach love by receiving it. And remember, asking for help is also helping someone else find their purpose. Fourth, when memory begins to blur, focus on presence. Write down your stories. Record voice messages. Share your memories with someone younger. These are your living gifts, life lessons only you can give. And lastly, when you face goodbye, let your grief become a garden. Water it with remembrance. Tell the stories. Light the candle. You carry generations in your heart. That is a powerful, sacred role. In the end, aging with purpose means choosing every day to live fully, even when it hurts. especially when it hurts. Because you, dear elder, are not disappearing. You are deepening. And that is the greatest elderly wisdom of all.